I've been able to kind of make being here make sense. Because, like, if you can't laugh, you know. Hello, my name is Bucky Miller. I'm an artist. I'm a photographer. I'm actually from Phoenix. I was born 10 blocks from here. And it's like I drove past the hospital where I was born to get here today, which is very cool. Yeah, I'm just happy to be here. When I made Lucy, I was pet sitting in Central Texas outside Austin. And it's occurred to me in the past couple of years that I actually think I've made like most of my favorite photographs while pet sitting for somebody. And it's this really funny sort of situation where you become familiar with an unfamiliar space really rapidly because you're like inserted into somebody else's living situation and in charge of their animals, like keeping them alive. It's like brand new conditions all the time that are like brand new studios to work in, and the way that people's pets interact with their furniture and their other things. It's just really interesting. Like every situation is different. And I was actually watching 2 dogs, 2 cats, 3 ducks, and 5 chickens at the time. I made so many photographs of these animals. Like I was just like, it was a month-long thing, and I was just like, all right, today's chicken day. I'm going outside. I'm setting up some obstacle courses. We're gonna see what happens there. But I made Lucy because, well, Lucy's the dog in the photograph, and you know, the one that's looking back at me. And I made the picture Lucy just because she was sitting there staring at me already, and you know, she'd get up on the back of the couch and kind of hang out and be looking at me on the other side of the room. And I was like, oh, this is like an interesting situation. This is a very posed dog. I like to put things on TV for pictures. Like, it's this very low-key element of staging where I'm not really totally responsible for whatever shows up, but I can direct it in a certain direction. And my go-to for that is nature shows. Like it's always something. Like I've had a lot of success in the past with bullfrogs, for instance. I was working with a digital camera, so I made it, and then I looked at it, and like as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, that's good. Like that explains something that I've been trying to get at for a while, and I don't even really know what it is, but it just felt like all of the sudden there was new context for some other stuff that I've been working on. Yeah, they're multi-purpose, the animals. I mean, on some level, I think that photography leads you to what you're interested in. The most important thing for me about animals is that they don't need language. Animals get by, they exist completely without the use of any sort of verbal or written language. And I think in that they share this weird parallel with photography. And I'm really interested in photography as a sort of pre-verbal or non-verbal means of communication, this thing that can mean so much without having to actually, you know, depend on text, and can be so versatile. And I think that through animals, I've gotten closer to the feeling of excitement that I get when making a picture. Like even this one in particular, I can feel the similarity. It's like the sort of blank, but also like really rich expressions and acrobatics and, you know, just existence, the presence of an animal. I think that it can convey so much. So then when you can boil that down into a picture, it becomes this sort of flag. And I try not to only photograph animals. They're this little segment of what I do, but I've found that their consistent presence is kind of these characters, these protagonists almost, helps me build the world that I'm actually looking for in pictures. Because it's this world, but it's also like the picture world, and it needs somebody And I think who it needs is, some critters. I am interested in photography's eagerness to embrace dualities. And that's something that has been important to me kind of since I started getting serious about it. I went to school here at Arizona State, and felt like that was something that some of my professors there sort of started trumpeting. And then the more that I thought about it, the more that I realized, like, oh, this is really deep. What I mean by embracing dualities is that, photography is both a record of the world and this fabrication. It is somehow both like a perfectly flat two-dimensional object, but also contains depth, has like a dimensionality to it. It's completely removed from time, but also of time, and has this duration to the exposure. But this picture, I think, really just hits you over the head with it a little bit, because you've got these two different animals competing over your attention. And they're both making eye contact with the photographer, but both doing it in totally different ways. Like, they're actually making eye contact with different photographers, which is the really weird thing about it. Like, Lucy's there with me, but then the baboon is on TV looking at whoever that cinematographer was, and then is only like transferred into my field of view by being on television. So you get this sort of like double distance, this like presence and absence, both kind of performing the same straight ahead view, the straight ahead like locked in on the photographer, and the dance between the two, the way they sit right on top of each other. It's a complicated version of presence. One is much more present than the other, but the less present one somehow seems to almost be in control, as the more present, sort of softer, sort of more relatable, almost innocent bystander version of the animal is perhaps not even aware that there's let's be real, is not aware at all that there's a baboon on the television behind her. Yeah, Lucy and the baboon, who I should name the baboon. Yeah. Trudy?
Ooh, it's a lady baboon.
We'll call the baboon Trudy. So Lucy and Trudy, Lucy and Trudy kind of, they are very much playing with the classic motif of the comedy and tragedy masks. You've got Lucy as this sort of happy version, the comedy, and then you've got the baboon as the tragedy. Or maybe you could read it or in the other way around, where Trudy is like the ridiculous, like funny one. Like, it's kind of absurd. There's this like green cast to it that turns Trudy into kind of a goblin creature, which is just, the TV being at a different light temperature than the rest of the photograph. And then you have Lucy as kind of this like hapless innocent. So there's a balance there. There's a push and a pull, but on some level, I think that it is, the dog is comedy. I am primarily guided by the possibility of delight in my work. I think that photography itself is hilarious. Just like as a thing that exists, sometimes I catch myself just thinking, how is this even a thing? Like, how has technology brought us here to where not only do we have photography, but it is just the most common thing in our world? Like, I often wonder if I communicate more with photographs than I do with language. I don't think I do, but I think that it's close. And it's this bizarre sort of abstraction. And we use it in the strangest ways. But no, I think photography has always been funny. I mean, when you look back in history and that people had to like have their heads in harnesses to be held still long enough to be exposed, that's funny. Like there's a slapstick to it. there's a ridiculousness to it. But then photography is also capable of revealing a darkness in the world and in dealing with a darkness in the world. There's like a coping that's going on in my work where, you know, I look back to the stuff that I was making when I was a student here, and I think that I found a humorous pathway through what I saw as just an inexplicable environment, almost. Like an environment that just continued to expand and lay on top of itself and replicate in the strangest ways as the world just got hotter. and the absurdity of Phoenix growing in the way that it did, and that it continues to, as like you come back every summer, it's like, oh, whoa. But and it's not, you know, it's not just that, but it's just this it's this gift, photography. It's this tool that gives folks the ability to kind of find their own comfort within something that is much bigger and very far outside of any of our control. By latching onto humor in the face of chaos or darkness or absurdity, I've been able to kind of make being here make sense. Because, like, if you can't laugh, you know, that's a sound bite. That's, yeah, but I'm serious. Like, if like, I think the worst thing that could happen would be to stop being able to find humor in the world. Photography suggests something deadpans. Photography is portraying a deadpan, but it also always has an element of artificiality to it, an element of like complete removal from a blank slate. Like, you know, I think about how, you know, somebody like I've heard Richard Misrach referred to as making deadpan pictures before, because it's just like that's an example where it's like someone just looking at the world as it is and being like, this is what was here. Like, I've heard that as dead, but that's also so much dependent on the perspective of the photographer. And like, I am really interested in the Buster Keaton analogy because, you know, those were incredibly elaborate set pieces. Buster Keaton's films were full of these incredibly elaborate set pieces that are played as just so matter of fact. Like, things happen, and Keaton is a part of this kind of machine that is like all around him. And Tati as well, Jacques Tati, another example of that. And I think that, you know, for my work, the possibility of like bringing in fabrication to situations that are more traditionally deadpan creates this third thing, which is a hybrid deadpan theater puppet show that just a lot of fun. That is kind of the sweet spot in terms of both embracing that alleged deadpan, but also winking at the fact that there is always more going on. There are so many people in this show that are in my DNA as an artist. I mean, it's bonkers. It's so weird to be in this room with this work. It is like the most ridiculous honor. And let me like backtrack and say that this museum is in my DNA. The first art show that I ever saw was an Andy Warhol exhibition at this museum when I was a small boy. This building itself, it is a huge honor to be showing in here. But then this show in particular, it's like a double homecoming. You know, there are works in this show by artists who I have revered since I started looking at photography. I mean, you start with Lartigue, like the first picture in the room, the boy photographer. He's always been this fascinating figure to me. You've got a meat guard over there, and then you move through to like the street photographers. But yeah, just like continuing to move through the show, I mean, you run into stuff in here that is some of the most important thought on photography for me. You've got Robert Cumming in here, which is someone who I like came to late, and then once I found, was like, there's never been anyone who got it more than this guy. And you've got the Hollis Frampton, Marian Fowler work, and Frampton's writing was super, super important to me early on, and it's something that I still return to and think about pretty regularly. You put me right next to a William Wegman picture, and I used to work for him, so that's cool and weird. Like there's a bunch. I mean, the list goes on and on. I'm just looking around now, and I'm like, oh yeah, Heineken. Like, you've got evidence in here. You've got like really amazing contemporary folks like Tommy Kaz right here, which is awesome. It's Sig Jackson. Like it's a really cool show. It's really cool to be a part of it. I don't know. Everyone. Can I just say, like, all of them are important? Because it's a good group. My upbringing in Phoenix primed me to be the artist that I am now by being just the weirdest city in America. I love Phoenix. It's such a treat to get to come back here even when it's 110 degrees outside. And it's interesting to see like the directions that the city has taken since I left over a decade ago now. Being able to kind of dig into the landscape of a city that just seemed so improbable and so sort of out of nowhere. I mean, Phoenix being in the desert and surrounded by the desert makes it feel almost in itself like a Max Ernst painting or something. Like it is this big, surreal landscape. And the one thing that Phoenix has in abundance more than anywhere else that I've ever lived or spent time is parking lots. And the things that you can learn from a parking lot are infinite, just infinite. Like there is no better training ground for photography than hanging out in a big old suburban parking lot for hours on end, even without a camera. I mean, before I started taking pictures in earnest, I was just a suburban teenager sitting in Quick Trip parking lots. And I think that was research. You know, I think that really learning the bizarre sort of gradients of smoothness between asphalt and concrete, the geometry of parking blocks, the absurd attempts at shade that some of the Palo Verde trees provide in little, like, you know, planter medians in the middle of some of the parking lots. It built itself into this like fantasy land before I even really realized what it was. And it's very funny because like I wasn't that young when I left. I was in my late 20s, but I feel like I've gained a much deeper understanding of the pictures that I made when I lived here since I've left and since I've experienced other cities and their parking lots, because I feel like I really gravitated towards compression. Part of growing up in Phoenix was skateboarding for me. I was deeply entrenched in skateboard culture for a long, long time. I mean, it was kind of my entire identity for a while. And this was a really just like productive, welcoming environment for skateboarders despite the heat. Like when you're 17, you don't care that it's 105 degrees outside. You'll still go skate all day. You'll just get a gallon of water and go. And other than that, the weather was very welcoming. So I ended up meeting folks from all over the country who came here to skateboard because they could do it all year. It would just be hot sometimes. You go out at night, you know. But yeah, I think that does sort of, I mean, there's a weird, almost cliche around artists who skateboard, I think, where it's like skateboarding teaches you a different way of looking at the world. And I think it's true. I mean, I think that you spend more time paying attention to the small details of architecture or the eccentricities of a city's layout, because those become potentially exploitable for the skateboarder. But I think even more than that for me, well, maybe not more than that, but in equal measure to that was that I just grew up skateboarding around people who wanted to photograph skateboarding. So one of my best friends when I was a teenager, his name is Matt Price, and he is now a professional skateboard photographer. And he and I used to sit in his house in Mesa, his parents' house, when we were 14 years old, and like look at cameras on the internet. And I learned photography through him and with him. But anytime that I would try to take pictures of skateboarding, I would get really bored, because I would just be, you know, sitting there waiting for somebody to do a trick. And I was like, I'd rather actually be skateboarding or doing something else. So I would like wander off and end up photographing other stuff. And then through that, it became much more exciting to be photographing. And yeah, you're then looking at those same environments, those same sort of like, you know, in between parts of the city, like a drainage ditch or a like loading dock behind a strip mall or something, or a parking lot. But these places that like can very easily get kind of skimmed over become really, really significant. But I never realized that you could like do photography seriously or like study photography, that there was any sort of, I never realized that there was any sort of like way to approach photography critically until I was at skateboard summer camp and my boss was there getting a degree in photography. And I was like, oh, you can do that? Cool. I don't think that my work argues for any one particular way of being in the world. I think that my work argues for multiple ways of being in the world. I think that my work argues for the possibility that there is not one way of being in the world, and that there's an argument that adherence to one set of beliefs is not fruitful. I think that it's possible to find more generous paths through the world and more present paths through the world. I think that there is an argument in my work for approaching the world slowly and hopefully with some empathy and a softness and an awareness and a non-dogmatic, non-binary approach to things. Like I don't use one camera, I don't use one tool. I don't think that the best picture is the best made picture. I think it's the picture that does the thing you need it to do with the camera that you had on hand at that time to communicate that thing. I think that photography too often gets wrapped up in the idea of fidelity, and I'm not that interested in that. I think that that leads to a narrow view of what's possible. And I hope to portray something along the lines of like, I never thought about that. You know? Like, oh, there's like a weird, that's weird. Like, okay, cool. Like, let's change things up a bit. Let's like go diagonally at this thing. In a word, diagonal. A diagonal approach to the world. Yeah. I hope that makes sense in some way.
Yeah.
This is wild. Do I have a joke? Yeah. Okay, so here's my joke as fast as I can tell it. There's a guy driving a big refrigerated truck, and it breaks down on the side of the road, and it's full of penguins. And he's like, what am I going to do? I can't get these penguins to the zoo, and I need to get these penguins to the zoo. And then another ice cream truck drives by, and he waves down the ice cream truck. He's like, hey, will you take my penguins to the zoo? I'll give you $500. And the guy takes his penguins, and he's like, whew, oh, that's a relief. And then he takes his car in town to get the truck fixed, whatever. And he's like, oh, while I'm waiting for my car, I'm going to go see a movie. And he goes to the movie, and the movie theater is full of penguins. And he sees the ice cream truck driver there. He's like, what are you doing? I told you to take my penguins to the zoo. And the guy goes, well, I did, but you gave me so much money, I had some left over. I thought I'd take them to a movie too. You're not supposed to tell that joke that fast, but that was fun. That actually might be the way to tell that joke. I don't know.